Welcome back. I've been running into an issue lately where my CPU has been holding me back in a lot of tasks. Whether it would be in video editing, rendering, modeling, gaming, or other workloads, it simply isn't good enough anymore. So we're on the same page. I'm talking about my i5-8400 that I used since 2018. Being an 8-year-old processor that wasn't even high-end back in its day, it's starting to show its age. I was lucky enough to get 8th gen back then because if I got 7th gen, I would be in a worse situation than I'm currently in now. That was when Intel was still doing its worst version of the TikTok production model, where they would just re-release the same processor with the same core counts with just ever so slightly higher clocks. But with 8th gen, Ryzen was starting to be a proper competitor with their 6 and 8 cores, and that finally led Intel to step up their game. Unfortunately, they didn't step it up that much yet, and were experimenting with what they could get away with. For an example, i5s currently have the model of 6 cores and 12 threads, and some E-cores down the line. But with Coffee Lake, they only had 6 threads, meaning that they didn't even have hyperthreading. Not only that, all of the processors from this generation were way more cache-starved than what we have now. Like my i5-8400, it only has 9 MB of L3 cache compared to the time equivalent Ryzen 5 1600, which had 16 MB. Tasks that benefited from having more cache and threads performed better on AMD, while games and more single-threaded heavy workloads were faster on Intel. This was a similar story with the higher-end processors as well, maybe even worse. The i7-8700 has 6 cores and 12 threads, with only 12 MB of L3 cache, while the Ryzen 7 counterpart had 8 cores and 16 threads, with the same 16 MB for cache. Also, AMD had another huge benefit that wasn't certain at the time. Unlike Intel, AMD released 5 generations for that platform. With each, they dramatically improved single-core performance, heightened cache amounts, and released even more higher-end processor variants like the X3D lineup or Ryzen 9s. But I'm not going to delve into that. That's out of the scope for this video. Back to my i5, I was planning to upgrade to AM5. It has great processors that don't require huge amounts of cooling, and it also offers great upgrade plans for the future. However, with such a huge move, I don't really want to cheap out on anything. So I stayed somewhat hesitant to pull the trigger. Until one day, when I was doom scrolling on our country's marketplace, I stumbled upon an i7-9700F. The seller was offering it for €80, which is an awesome price since other folks sell it for up to €180 still. Another thing is that I can sell my i5 for around €40, which if I subtract that from the price of the i7, I basically got it for €40, and that is an amazing deal if I do say so myself. So I purchased it, and here we are. While you watch me install it, I will go over as to why I think this is a great deal. Remember when I said that Intel was experimenting at this time? Well, even though this generation is only a refresh of Coffee Lake, it brought some improvements, one of which is with the i7s. They went from 6 cores to 8. They did, however, lose on hyperthreading, which was reserved for the i9s. So it's technically a slight downgrade in some instances compared to the 8th gen sibling. It only has 8 threads compared to the original 12. But I believe having more real cores is important than having more threads, since not all workloads can utilize hyperthreading. But is this theory true?
Good battle.
Now I don't have an i7-8700 to test this theory, but I do want to answer another one, the one you saw in the title of this video. Is it worth it to upgrade to such a processor? What are the gains? To answer this, we're going to go over some productivity workloads and then we're going to check game performance. Our first benchmark will be Synthetic, CPU-Z's benchmarking tool. You already seen it on the channel. It's a simple tool that gives you a score for both single-thread and multi-thread performance. The single-thread score isn't that much more impressive, which isn't surprising considering it's basically from the same generation of CPUs. The multi-threaded statistic, on the other hand, is way more impressive. a 63.6% uplift. Now there are two things important to mention. Number one, I'm not using fast RAM. It's pretty slow actually, running at 2400 megatransfers. Of course, if I had memory running at, say, 3200 megatransfers, then the results would be slightly higher. As seen here, when I set my speeds to 66 megatransfers. The reason why I'm not running at this higher speed is due to stability. Sure, most of the time my RAM kits can run at that speed, but sometimes they cause the computer to It doesn't help that not only do I have two different RAM kits, but I also have all 4 RAM slots filled, which makes such changes to speed even more difficult. At least I'm running in dual channel mode, so it's not as bad as it could be, but still. Another thing to mention is this test is synthetic, just as I mentioned at the start, meaning that the results don't really reflect the reality of normal day-to-day use, which you'll see in just a moment. Another benchmark is Cinebench R24, which basically renders a 3D scene in chunks, and depending on how fast it renders them, it awards you points. Fascinatingly, the performance difference is the same as it was in CPU-Z, which I think shows you that, at best, you can expect this kind of improvement in performance from the upgrade. Though as I said, don't expect this to be the same in every scenario. Now to some tests that are more of my day-to-day. Starting with Camtasia 2022, this is the editing software that I use. It is well known, especially with these newer versions, that it is poorly optimized. And these results just confirm that. There's around a 5% difference from this upgrade. What is strange is that the GPU encoding option is either busted or it's completely useless, since it should speed up rendering massively. Instead, it doesn't help. Oh, and just so you know, the only thing running on this machine was Camtasia and the timer. To make sure I caught it on time, I recorded the whole rendering process with my phone. Overall, in this case, the upgrade didn't help at all. I use Handbrake when I re-encode the video into H.265, since Camtasia doesn't offer any other codecs than H.264. But I mainly do it because it saves me a lot of time uploading the video to YouTube. The 4K H.265 version of my videos is on average 2.6 gigabytes, while the H.264 is more around 5.5 gigabytes. Even compressed, it takes around 3 hours to upload with my internet speed. What the hell no! So it's an important step in my pipeline. I use the NVENC version of the codec, but since I'm testing a CPU, I ran it solely on it with these settings. And oh boy was it slow. I just set it to re-encode the first 5 minutes, but it would take so long that I just cut it down to who's gonna do more work in 8 minutes. And the results are pretty okay. Maybe they would have been more different if I had let them finish, but oh well. Still, it shows a decent difference between them. Of course, this isn't really practical, so I also tested with the GPU codec to see if it made any difference. Not really, honestly. It made practically no difference, which is a shame, but understandable. See, Camtasia? This is what GPU encoding should look like. Another interesting test I wanted to see was locally running AI. Sure, it runs on the GPU, but the CPU is still involved in the process, so I wanted to see if it helped in any way. And sure enough, it did help having a faster CPU. With this simpler model that was able to easily fit into VRAM, it raised the speed by 17.7 tokens, or around 11%. But what about a model that doesn't fit into VRAM? I tested this way more complex model that, in my current configuration, only supported partial GPU offload. It did make a slight improvement by around 22%. But I believe we would see even higher results if I had faster memory, since what doesn't fit into VRAM goes into RAM. Now let's go gaming. For every game, it will be tested in 720p at either maxed out or custom settings. This is because at 720p, the processor always causes a bottleneck no matter the game, and some of the higher settings slow down the processor more. With that mentioned, we'll first take a look at CS2. And would you look at that? That's quite impressive. Of course, it also depends on a map-to-map basis, like seen here. but it's still a huge improvement. Interestingly though, at 4K the CPU was still bottlenecking in some cases, even though the graph represents a clear GPU bottleneck. Another thing you might notice is that since the game never hogs the processor completely, recording doesn't cause any extra issues or slowdown. We'll see something similar in other titles as well. Apex Legends ran only slightly better, but there was a smaller drop when recording. Also, for those wondering, I'm keeping the frame rates affected by the recording software in, so that people that might think about streaming or recording know what to expect. Again though, at 4K the CPU was bottlenecking the GPU again, just like in CS. Maybe there are some effects that scale with the resolution and are handled by the CPU, who knows. Forza Horizon 5's improvements weren't that big, nothing too interesting to mention. GTA 5 Enhanced Edition sees a decent improvement without ray tracing. With ray tracing, it makes a big enough a difference to make the frame rate go over 60, unlike before where it hovered mainly around 50 down to the 40s. A very nice improvement. Helldivers 2 is a game that is extremely CPU bound. With the old setup, the best I could do was around 39 to 40 FPS, and when the action heated up, it was even worse, dropping down to the higher 20s. Finally, with this processor, I'm able to run this almost at 60 FPS all of the time. It really improves the feel of the game and makes it more enjoyable. And yes, I'm testing this at 4K, because I know there's no reason to go lower with this game. But for those that don't believe me, here's the game running at 1440p and the frame rate is basically identical. It is important to mention, however, that I'm running the game in DirectX 11 mode, not the default DirectX 12. Maybe there the CPU utilization is better, but I haven't tested it since DirectX 11 always performed better for me than its counterpart. Project Zomboid is a simple 2D game that is very CPU bound, as seen here. When you zoom the camera in, it runs perfectly, but as soon as you zoom out, the frame rate falls apart, and it gets even worse with huge crowds. While this crowd is very manageable, it should still put some strain on the CPU. It's better, but don't expect massive differences. The last game I wanted to test is The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered. It's very well optimized, especially for bigger amounts of cores, which is well visible in these statistics. We gained over 30 FPS in averages. Pretty good, I would say. Though it's interesting to see that both CPUs are equally slowed down by the recording software. And that's it? Is it better than my original CPU? Surely it is, especially when the programs are well designed for more cores. And even the games that don't completely utilize them, the extra cores are handy for background tasks, like the recording software, Spotify or Discord. It ensures that no extra slowdown is caused by background tasks. Though, tasks and games that rely on single-threaded performance don't really benefit that much from this upgrade. Still though, for €40, it's a fine deal that will breathe new life into my aging system. And finally, after this CPU won't be enough, I will buy into a new platform. Until then though, see ya.